Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Derek Whitmore always knew there was something different about him. Since he was a child, he noticed details that no one else did. While others quickly forgot conversations, objects, or faces, he remembered everything. Every word, every tone of voice, every sideways glance, it was all stored in his mind with frightening perfection. At school, while his classmates needed to review content multiple times, it was enough for him to look at it once to remember it forever. The teachers found it fascinating, his parents thought it was a gift. But as the years went by, he realized that having this ability wasn't always synonymous with ease. In fact, it started to become a burden that few could imagine. In his professional life, it was a golden key. When he decided to pursue a career in tax law, his mind became his greatest tool. Laws, articles, clauses, case law, everything was recorded, ready to be accessed as if he were opening any drawer in his head. While colleagues needed to research, review, and ask questions, he simply retrieved from memory. And he never made mistakes. This transformed him into one of the most promising lawyers, admired by some and feared by others. Clients sought him out for his efficiency, his almost superhuman precision, and competitors could barely understand how he managed to recall details that, for anyone else, would be irrelevant or long forgotten. However, in his personal life, this gift came at a high cost. Unlike ordinary people, who can leave behind an argument, a misplaced word, or an uncomfortable moment, Derek didn't have that luxury. Everything stayed there, stored. The expression on someone's face during a fight, a promise someone swore to keep, a suspicious look during a family meeting, it was all archived. And when you remember everything, even what should be forgotten, life becomes a minefield. With every step, a memory. With every attempt to start over, a memory surfaces to remind you that certain wounds never truly healed. It was precisely this ability that, years ago, made him realize he was being deceived by the woman he was in love with during college. Haley entered his life like a storm. Beautiful, charismatic, full of energy, the complete opposite of his methodical and calculated life. She was fun, spontaneous, and made him feel lighter. And for a while, he believed she was exactly what he needed. The relationship was intense, the kind that makes you believe you found someone to spend your whole life with. But at some point, the small contradictions began. Words out of context, stories that subtly changed, times that didn't add up. On that specific weekend, she said she was going skiing with friends. At first, nothing seemed strange. But during a simple phone call, a random phrase, said in the middle of the conversation, triggered Derek's brain. As if someone had pressed a button, his mind began pulling data, schedules, previous conversations, and the pieces didn't fit. The way she mentioned the location, the name of a hotel he remembered researching with her months earlier, which wasn't even operating that season anymore, was enough. Within seconds, he was sure she was lying. And with a quick search to confirm one detail or another, the truth came out. Haley wasn't at any ski resort. She was with another man. The shock was devastating. Not just because of the betrayal itself, but because his mind would never allow it to be erased. Every word she said during that time, every exchanged message, every lame excuse, it was all recorded forever. The breakup was inevitable. And painful. No matter how hard he tried to move on, every memory brought back that bitter taste, that feeling of being deceived by the person he trusted most. Years passed. He threw himself into work, built a solid career, became a reference. Until, when he least expected it, fate decided to play one of those tricks that not even he, with his sharp mind, could foresee. A new client, a new company, a new team. And there she was. Haley. Years older, different in some ways, but with that same magnetic smile that had once made him fall in love. The reunion was awkward. She seemed genuinely sorry for the past. She said she had been immature, that she got lost, that she made mistakes she still carried as scars on her soul. Derek, though reluctant, felt that maybe people could change. Maybe time had taught her something. Maybe, after so long, they deserved a second chance. What started as sporadic conversations at work quickly turned into more personal meetings, dinners, coffee dates, laughter that seemed lost in time but now emerged with strength. And little by little, that old feeling returned. Their connection was real. And suddenly, there they were again, rebuilding a story that had once been destroyed. This time, everything seemed different. More mature, more solid, more genuine. Until, after 2 years of dating, they decided to get married. And as ironic as it was, Haley never knew that the man she was exchanging vows with, the man she promised to spend her life with, was someone whose mind worked like a perfect machine. A human recorder. A camera that captured every second, every detail, every micro-expression. She never knew, and perhaps, if she had known, things might have been different. But that's the kind of thing only time reveals. What happened that Sunday, during a simple dinner, was something Derek never imagined witnessing again, not even in his worst nightmares. It was supposed to be an ordinary meal, the kind couples have while talking about everyday trivialities. Haley talked about work, how busy things were, demanding clients, tight deadlines. Everything was normal until, in the middle of a sentence, she dropped something that, to anyone else, would have gone unnoticed. But to someone like Derek, it sounded like an alarm going off in the middle of the night. She mentioned having had a long meeting that started late in the afternoon and extended until almost 8 o'clock, inside the auditorium of the company. For a second, he froze. And at that exact moment, his mind did what it knew how to do automatically. In fractions of a second, it pulled from memory the floor plan of that building, which he knew so well because months earlier, he had reviewed the lease contract for Haley's company. Every detail of that project was recorded as if he were holding the blueprint in his hands. And there was the mistake. That building never had an auditorium. It never existed, neither in the original plans nor in any renovation he perfectly remembered. And it wasn't a doubt. It was absolute certainty. Absolute. It was as if the ground disappeared beneath his feet. His brain began, at that very moment, running processes in the background, cross-referencing information, digging through memories, analyzing dialogues, gestures, routines. Everything. Small details that seemed irrelevant before began to emerge with frightening clarity. His mind, which always functioned like a supercomputer, was now focused on one goal, understanding how far that lie went. While Haley talked about how exhausted she was, Derek pretended normalcy. He rested his chin on his hand, smiled occasionally, nodded as if paying attention to every word. But inside, it was as if he were watching hundreds of scenes projected simultaneously. His memory brought back, like a punch to the stomach, a recollection from 3 weeks earlier, when she got home saying she had broken a heel on the sidewalk near the office parking lot. At the time, he didn't question it, it seemed like a common occurrence. But now, pulling up the vivid image, he saw her leaving the house that day wearing sneakers. White sneakers, no heels, no chance that accident could have happened. His brain instantly connected this to another episode. A Saturday when Haley left in the morning saying she was visiting a sick friend. She returned late in the evening, seemingly tired, and said she stayed there offering support, chatting, trying to cheer her friend up. That day, Derek hadn't paid much attention. But now, all he had to do was close his eyes, and the memory came back vividly, perfectly. When she opened the car door, there was a strong smell of cigarette smoke inside. A smell she hated and that, with absolute certainty, couldn't have come from that friend, who was completely against anything related to smoking. And, like a puzzle assembling itself, his memory pulled another piece of information. Mason. Her coworker. Tall, outgoing, the kind of guy who never misses a chance to be overly friendly. And who, coincidentally, was a smoker. Always had been. And as if that weren't enough, the most disturbing memory surfaced. When he got into the car the next day, he noticed the passenger seat was moved, adjusted for someone taller. Haley was barely 5'6". There was no way she needed that adjustment. At the time, he thought it was odd but didn't give it much thought. Now, it all made sense. The seat position, the smell, the lame excuse, it was all part of a poorly written script, full of holes that any ordinary person would never notice. But not Derek. From that point on, he realized he was living with, sleeping beside, sharing a life with someone who was hiding much more than it seemed. And the worst part was knowing she never imagined that the man she married, the one she saw as methodical, organized, predictable, was actually a walking recorder, a living archive capable of recalling any memory from any moment with a richness of detail no security camera could capture. The scariest part was realizing how his mind operated on levels he sometimes forgot himself. While talking to her, while pretending to listen to her daily stories, his memory brought up old conversations, like that lunch months ago when Haley casually mentioned a happy hour that came up last minute, but that same night, he recalled she came home wearing a different perfume, one he never used and that he thought at the time must have come from the environment. But now it made sense. Perfect sense. And as she kept talking, smiling, completely unaware that she was sitting across from someone who, at that very moment, already knew the truth was far from what she was trying to sell, Derek, inside, took a deep breath. Because from that point on, he knew his life would never be the same. And she had no idea. Derek's brain was working at full speed. Every past conversation, every detail forgotten by any ordinary person, now became a clear clue, evidence he didn't need to write down, record, or photograph, because his own mind handled it with absolute perfection. While pretending to live a normal routine, his mind was immersed in a silent and meticulous investigation. And what he began to uncover went beyond anything he had imagined. The most glaring episode happened 2 months before that dinner, when Haley mentioned she'd stay late to resolve an urgent issue with a new client. She said the project had to be finalized by Monday and that she'd probably leave after 9. And that same night, when she came home, she brought a milkshake in her hands, as if it were a loving gesture. And it really did seem that way. Except now, rewinding that day, a memory surfaced so vivid it felt like it had just happened. When she walked in, Derek noticed a subtle lipstick stain, in a shade that wasn't hers, on the collar of her own blouse. At the time, he thought it was just a reflection of some product, some distraction, something irrelevant. But now, combined with everything he was discovering, it was obvious. That detail didn't make sense. But nothing prepared Derek for what he uncovered next. Up to that point, he believed he was dealing with just an emotional, physical betrayal, the kind that, as painful as it is, still falls within human fragility. But in the sequence of connections his mind began to assemble, a financial pattern emerged. And for someone like him, an expert at tracking money, it was practically impossible to ignore. He pulled from memory a conversation he had with Haley months earlier, when she mentioned needing to make a transfer to help a distant cousin who was going through difficulties. At the time, it sounded simple. But now, analyzing every detail of that conversation, it became clear there was more to it. Determined to find out how far it went, Derek mentally reviewed everything he remembered about Haley's life story. He recalled a time, early in their relationship, when she mentioned having a half-brother on her father's side, someone she lost contact with as a child and never saw or heard from again. At the time, it seemed like just a random tidbit in the conversation. Now, it made too much sense. He cross-referenced dates, locations, and realized that the name on the account was, in fact, the name of that half-brother. And recalling a random conversation he'd had with a police officer friend years earlier, the final confirmation came. That man had been in prison for 6 years for fraud, forgery, and bank fraud. It was as if Derek's entire universe collapsed all at once. What until then seemed like just a marital betrayal revealed itself to be much bigger. He realized that, from the beginning, this marriage was part of something far darker. Haley hadn't chosen him just out of love. She saw an opportunity in him. A respected tax lawyer, with access to information, resources, and knowledge that could help her, even unknowingly, move money without raising suspicion. And she had done it for years, right under his nose. Or at least, she thought she had. At that moment, Derek understood he could no longer delay the confrontation. And he did it the way he always did everything in life, with surgical precision. He invited Haley to dinner. Acted as if everything was normal. And when she sat down, he looked her in the eyes and asked a simple question, which to her seemed trivial, but which carried the full weight of what was to come. With a smile on his face, he asked her where exactly the company's auditorium was. All the blood drained from her face instantly. She stammered, tried to change the subject, but he kept his gaze fixed, unshakable. Then he began to describe, word by word, every lie she had told in recent months. Every mismatched schedule. Every poorly formulated excuse. Every cigarette smell in the car. Every seat adjustment. Every restaurant she supposedly never visited. Every transfer made, every name, every number. As if reading a detailed investigation report, except this investigation was entirely stored in his mind. She tried to argue, tried to deny, tried to cry, put on a scene, say he was mistaken, that it was all in his head, but he didn't give her any room. With every attempt she made, he countered with a fact, a memory, proof, a recollection that dismantled any defense. Until, in a final act of desperation, she tried to play the victim, saying all of this stemmed from her past, that she didn't know how to get out of it, that her half-brother was blackmailing her, that she didn't want to but was forced. But even she didn't believe her own words at that moment. The final blow came when Derek placed a dossier on the table. Cross-referenced evidence, transfers, dates, calls, screenshots of public records, everything he needed to turn it into a criminal case. And looking her in the eyes, he said, without raising his voice, without changing his expression, that she had not only lost a husband but would also lose her freedom. Because before that dinner began, he had already sent all that material to the FBI. And at that moment, as she trembled, cried, begged for a second chance, he simply stood up, adjusted his tie, and said she would never see him again. He walked out without looking back, without packing bags, without making a speech, without drama. He vanished. And he took with him everything she thought she controlled. The money, the security, the comfortable life she built through lies and manipulation. And when she tried to call days later, the number no longer existed. When she searched for information, she discovered the lease on the house they lived in was in his name, and the term had expired. She was evicted. And for the first time, she understood that Derek was much more than she ever imagined. She thought she was married to an ordinary man, but in reality, she was married to someone whose greatest skill was being invisible. And when he wanted to disappear, he disappeared in a way even professional criminals wouldn't be able to trace.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.